Solving quadratic equations by factoring or using the square root property. Here are two very fast examples, and then I'm going to do a slightly more complicated one and talk about this a little bit more. Over here, the thing you need to remember is you've got to get it set equal to 0. So that means either the x squared needs to move to the right hand side, which is fine. It just makes your leading coefficient negative, which is harder to factor. So I would recommend subtracting the 14 and adding 5x and putting them in order. So it'd be positive 5x, negative 14, and be sure to put equals 0 because that's very important. And without going into the why this works, you need to do your factoring of this trinomial. And if you don't remember how to do this super duper fast, please go back and watch one of the videos on how to factor a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. But you should not have any steps in between here and here. 7 and negative 2 are the numbers you need. And then each of those factors have to equal 0, because we're talking about two numbers that multiply together and equal 0, and the only way that happens is if one of those two is 0, and then you solve for x. Subtract 7 from both sides, we get x is equal to negative 7 is one of our answers, and x equals 2 is the other answer. And if we plug it back into the original, you'll notice that negative 7 squared is 49. Negative 5 times a negative 7 would be positive 35, so 14 plus 35 is also 49. The same thing's going to happen if we plug in 2. 2 squared is 4. Negative 5 times 2 is negative 10. 14 minus 10 is also 4, so 4 is equal to 4, so they both work. Now, do you have to check your answers every time? No, but it's not a bad idea. Now, as far as the square root property goes, what you do whenever you don't have a third term, or in other words the middle linear term where x is just to the first power, all you have is x squared and 49, you can square root both sides. And the thing that you need to remember when you do the square root property is that you need to put a positive or a negative possibility. So you could have a positive answer or a negative answer, and I'll explain why here in a moment. So the square root of x squared is just x, and you could have a positive or a negative 7 for the answer, simplifying your radical at that point. It's very, very fast. Now, here's why. Suppose that we go back to the x squared equals 49. If I were to do this using factoring, I would move the 49 over and get it set equal to 0, which would make this x squared minus 49 is equal to 0, which is a difference of squares, which factors to x minus 7, x plus 7, and that equals 0. And notice that we're going to have x minus 7 equals 0, x plus 7 equals 0. A lot of people get to where they skip this particular step, which is fine as long as you realize it's still there. So we get positive 7 here, and on the second one we get negative 7, and that's where the positive or the negative has to come in because there are two possibilities. Now, one of the harder versions of this is when you have a lot of simplifying with a radical to do. For example, let's say we have x squared, let's say 5x squared plus 7. This one is probably worst case scenario. Now you can use the quadratic formula on this, which is what the next video is, but let's assume that we're going to do it really quick with the square root property since we don't have the middle x to the first term, the linear term. So we're going to subtract 7 and we're going to divide by 5 to get the x squared completely by itself. So 5x squared is going to give us a negative 7, and then divide by 5 and we're going to get negative 7 fifths. Now, using the square root property, this means we have to plus or minus square root this whole entire fraction. If you look back at simplifying radicals video, you'll notice that I do a fraction very similar to this, plus or minus. Now, square root of negative 7 fifths is the same thing as square root of negative 7 over square root of 5, so don't forget your plus or minus. And simplifying this is going to be I square root of 7 over square root of 5. But we need to rationalize this, so we need to multiply the top and bottom by square root of 5 over square root of 5. And again, watch the radical simplification video on for more help on this. Okay, square root of 35 over square root of 25, which is just a regular 5. And so there's the final answer on that.